All right, I am really excited to do this next painting. I've got a picture of some boats on a glass lake, a lot of texture, a lot of great lighting, and it's going to be a great picture to paint. So I'm excited to do that. But before I do that, I want to back up a little bit and show a little bit of how I start a painting and what types of materials I use, the paints, the surfaces that I paint on, that kind of stuff. So I'm going to be starting painting on this masonite board here. I like to paint on masonite board. I also like to paint on stretched canvas. I stretch my own canvas, and for right now I'm just going to use this masonite board because really I don't want to go buy some new stretcher bars. So this is what I've got on hand, and this is what I'm going to use. So I'm going to cut this masonite board down to size and get it all ready, and then I'm going to show some of the paints that I use and some of the materials that I use and go from there. Okay, I've cut down my masonite board here to 16 by 20, and I've given it a light sand with some sandpaper so the paint sticks to it well. I'm going to take a nice big brush that I use to usually paint my house, and I'm going to paint it with this acrylic gesso. It's white acrylic gesso to give it a base for the oil paint to stick to, so it doesn't just seep into the masonite board. And usually I'll give it 3 good coats to completely cover the masonite board. I'll put it on really liberally. Just throw a whole bunch down on there to coat it really nice. Now I'll do a second coat, and as I'm putting these coats on, I go back over the top. Once the coat is on, I'll go back over the top and lightly with the bristles go horizontally and vertically to give it a bit of a canvas texture to it, almost like a crosshatch texture to it. And then finally the third coat, go over the top again, and once the third coat is on, then I'll let it dry and do another sanding to get all the loose paint off the top and some of those high grooves, ridges, to make it a little bit smooth, but not too smooth where I still like the texture on there. Now I want to talk a little bit about my palette because I think it's important. What I did was I took a piece of glass and put some gray duct tape on the back of it. And why this is important is because it gives me a nice neutral gray background so that when I mix colors, it gives me a good idea of what the colors are going to actually look like instead of a white or black palette. So here's some of the tools that I use. I've got a nice tackle box here that I use to store all my stuff in. Nothing too fancy. Then I've got some mineral spirits that I use to wash my brushes and thin the paint. Then I've got some liquid original here. It's one of the main mediums that I use. It helps dry the paint a little faster and helps it spread easier, thin out a little bit. So I like to use that. Then I have some different palette knives. Here's a couple of palette knives that I use. I use palette knives to for some detail work, but also to spread some paint around the canvas. And then I use this utility knife to scrape the paint off of my palette. So use that. Now for my paint brushes, here's a few paint brushes that I use. My 3 favorite paint brushes are these ones here. They're Rosemary Co. Dagger brushes. And they're so great because they're like a utility paintbrush where you can use the flat side for large areas of paint, or use the pointed end for fine detail work. So you can use them for multiple scenarios. And then I just have a big paintbrush here that I use for mostly underpaintings and large areas of paint. Sometimes for thicker paint, I throw that on there. And then a smaller version of that I use for certain things. And then just a flat brush that I have as well. Now here's some filbert brushes that I use, and I like to use these when I'm using thicker paint, and I like to just load them up with paint and use them for different textures. So those are good uses. And then a fine detail brush here that I use for details, and I also sign my paintings with this one. And then lastly, I like to use these old brushes that are just frayed and have fraying ends coming off of them. And what I use these for, oddly enough, is for detail work. And so I'll use them a lot of times for textures and little highlights on things. Rather than using a little teeny brush for each individual highlight, I'll use that. Now, these are a lot of the colors that I use, but there are 6 that I mainly use to base everything else off of. And when you're little, you learn that red, yellow, and blue make all the colors under the rainbow. But in the print world, it's CMYK, cyan, magenta, and black, which is why I like to use quinacridone magenta, cadmium yellow, and cobalt teal. And then the ultramarine blue and burnt umber take care of the black, mixing those together make a nice black. So those are the main colors, and then white. I also use white as the 6th. Now to support those, I also like to use cadmium yellow because it's a bit warmer than cadmium lemon, which are both tongue twisters. Then as supporting reds, I like to use cadmium red and alizarin crimson. So yellow ochre I like to use. It's an earthy color and it warms things up a bit, but it also is a good underpainting color, so I use it for underpaintings. Now these 3 greens I use very sparingly, but sometimes I'll pull them out. And cobalt blue and cerulean blue I like to also use quite a bit, especially when dealing with sky or just when mixing with other colors. They give a different tone than the ultramarine blue. Now those are the main colors that I use, and they've treated me pretty well. Now really, I think the next step is let's get started on this new painting.